in Ukraine has thrown global energy supplies into crisis. The UK and Europe are hurriedly assessing how to reduce their reliance on Russian gas after sanctions were imposed on Moscow. But President Putin is fighting back, demanding that foreign buyers pay for Russian gas in rubles from tomorrow or face having their supplies cut. While Europe gets more than a third of its gas supply from Russia, European leaders are rejecting the demand so far, with Germany calling it blackmail.
We have
looked at the contracts for the gas supplies and other supplies, and in these it says that the payment will be in euros, sometimes in dollars, but usually in euros. I made this clear in the conversation with the Russian president that this will remain the case. And whatever his ideas are on this subject, and whatever will happen, we'll look at it very closely. But in any case, the rule for companies is that they can pay in euros if they want to, if they can, and that they will.
Well, our climate change correspondent Hannah Thomas-Peter is here with me. So, Hannah, what are the implications of this Russian threat?
Well, they're huge. I mean, you heard there Germany standing firm, but there are big implications. Vladimir Putin knows that Europe is, to a large extent, dependent on Russian oil and particularly gas. Germany gets some 40% of its gas from Russia. So now the reality is that Germany has had to activate some emergency energy management plans. The economics minister is asking householders to think about the amount of gas and energy that they are using. I mean, the reality is that big industry in Germany would be the first to bear the brunt of any shortages. But we are looking at the very real prospect, if Vladimir Putin follows through on these threats, of one of the world's largest economies rationing gas. Meanwhile, as you say, the scramble to get off Russian fossil fuel very much continues. That, of course, means more renewable energy and finding alternative suppliers. But in many European countries, Germany included, it might also mean burning more coal to plug the gap.
Interesting. And I've got another subject I want to ask you about in just a moment, because 2 shale gas wells in Lancashire, which were due to be sealed in June, are now going to remain open. The fracking company Quadrilla has been given an extra year to make its case for shale gas extraction to boost Britain's energy supply. So, Hannah, what does this move tell us? Does this mean that fracking is still on?
Well, in 2019, the British government banned fracking because it was worried about the potential for seismic activity, for earthquakes. And that risk hasn't gone away unless Quadrilla manages to prove otherwise, as it certainly will try to do in the next 12 months. But a lot has changed as well since 2019. Although the ban remains in place, a lot has changed. Of course, Russia has invaded Ukraine. The price of oil and gas is sky high. And Boris Johnson is under significant political pressure now from a small group of very well-organised and loud MPs who are saying that net zero climate commitments aren't properly thought through and that the Prime Minister is falling short on domestic fossil fuel extraction. They want more extraction in the North Sea. They want more of the fuel beneath our feet. That's the phrase they are using. Now, the official line from Number 10 will definitely be Quadrilla simply applied for an extension and got one. It's standard practice. But the reality is that this extension has conveniently provided Number 10 with a decent amount of wriggle room as it prepares to announce the future of energy supply and security in this country.
Hannah, thanks very much indeed. Well, renewable energy bosses say they can end the UK's dependency on gas for electricity within 5 years. They've been meeting the Prime Minister to discuss removing barriers to wind and solar projects, which would reduce the country's vulnerability to huge fluctuations in global gas prices and help tackle climate change. But gas used for electricity is only part of the UK's consumption of the fossil fuel, as our science and technology editor Tom Clark reports.
This is Whiteley near Glasgow, Western Europe's largest onshore wind farm. If we're serious about weaning ourselves off Russian oil and gas, the owner of this project argues, why not tap into far more of the freely available energy source that Scotland has plenty of?
We have 25% of Europe's wind resource in Scotland. Honest to God, we have to use it. It's absolutely criminal if we don't use that, and it's such a waste. It doesn't matter whether you're doing this to get to net zero, whether you're doing this to get a more secure system, or whether you're doing this to get cheaper electricity. They all tell you the same thing. build, 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 and do it fast.
The renewables industry were at Downing Street to urge the Prime Minister to remove barriers to onshore and offshore wind as part of his energy security strategy. Done right, they argue, wind could replace Russian gas to generate electricity in just 5 years. Onshore wind turbines are now by far the cheapest way of generating electricity, and they're some of the quickest to build too. But these things alone aren't going to get us out of the energy crisis. On and offshore wind farms and solar power generate about 28% of our electricity. Nuclear, another 16%. But more than a third still comes from gas. But that's just electricity. Look at our overall energy consumption, and the majority, a total of 73%, still comes from oil and gas. In order to reach net zero, there's already plans to replace our 32 million vehicles powered by petrol and diesel, and the 80% of our homes heated by gas boilers. But that's going to require a lot more electricity.
The switch to EVs is happening, and it's starting to happen fast, and over time we're likely to have much more electrified heating. That is going to put more pressure on our grid locally and how it operates, and that's a real challenge that the government's got to think through.
So that means we're going to need more of that, maybe nuclear power or battery storage or something to fill in on those days when the wind isn't blowing.
It's likely that the electricity system over the next 10, 15, 20 years is likely to double in size, which is going to be an extraordinarily difficult achievement. So we need a kind of all of the above from clean technology.
Overhauling our energy sector will take years. So in the short term, we'll continue to rely on gas. And without measures to reduce demand, those high energy prices are here to stay. Tom Clark, Sky News.
Now for some of the day's other climate news. And the Environment Secretary, George Eustice, has today responded to the news this week that the Cambo oil and gas fields licence is to be extended for another 2 years.
We're very clear that we want to get to net zero by 2050, and we're very clear that we're going to significantly expand our renewable energy contribution, particularly through offshore wind. But it's also the case that everybody recognises that there's a role for gas during that transition to a fully renewable future. And in particular, some vehicles are going to need probably hydrogen power to power them, things like buses and lorries and so on. And realistically, during that transition, you will need some gas to split the hydrogen from that gas to get what's called blue hydrogen. And so there's a role for gas during the transition from where we are now to the net zero future we want to get to.
The European Commission has said it will do whatever it takes to increase solar energy equipment manufacturing. The EU's Energy Commissioner said the move to rebuild the industry would allow Europe to cut reliance on Russian gas. For the EU to achieve a climate-neutral economy by 2050, more than 80% of its electricity will need to come from renewable energy. And England's mountain hare population could increase by restoring peatland. A study in the journal Ecology and Evolution found that the number of hares found on restored peatland and bogs was higher than on moorlands. Conservationists say there are only 3,500 mountain hares left in England. Carbon emissions in the UK are increasing as the economy recovers from the coronavirus crisis, but they've yet to reach pre-pandemic levels. The latest assessment by the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy found that greenhouse gas emissions rose by 4.7% in 2021 compared to 2020 levels, mainly due to an increase in road usage. Now, it means that 424.5 million tonnes of carbon were released into the atmosphere last year. But that's still lower than in 2019, when carbon emissions were 554.8 million tonnes, 5.2% more than 2021.
When you sow roads, you harvest traffic. And I think the Welsh have really worked it out, thanks to their climate change ministry and their world first piece of legislation that all decisions must consider future generations, which is something that's really weird that Westminster and Washington and Brussels don't have. But anyway, they've decided to put a halt on all new roads. If you look at the UK, we have been pumping out fossil fuels for far longer than anyone else. We've already used up so much more of our budget than is currently calculated for. And our aims to, we might be potentially on track for carbon zero by 2050, but if you really do the maths properly, the leading lights in the science of this area are really saying that the UK needs to be decarbonising significantly faster than 2050. So whilst it's always good to see reductions in carbon emissions, in my view, it's nowhere near fast enough.
A new British polar ship has completed a key series of tests on its maiden voyage in Antarctica. The vessel, named after Sir David Attenborough, will give scientists cutting-edge facilities for studying the oceans, seafloor, ice and atmosphere. The ship has completed 10 days of testing, showing it can break through ice that's a metre thick at a speed of 3 knots. It's operated by the British Antarctic Survey, which says it will transform how ship-based science is conducted in polar regions. Well, joining us now to hear more is Dr. Andrew Fleming, a director at the British Antarctic Survey. Welcome to you. So this trip was all about testing this ship's capacity. So tell us a little bit about what you found and what the future ambitions are for it.
Yeah, so you're correct. Our main task during this period was to make sure that the ship was capable and matched its design to move through sea ice, as you described, and that was the main thrust. So we were looking for the right type of ice and the right conditions to do those tests, and we were very pleased with the results. We're waiting for the final analysis to come in, but overall we're very pleased. Some things to rectify in the future, but it's all looking good.
That's good to hear. Give us an idea, though, of how this will help polar scientists in the future learn more about ice and about climate change.
The Sir David Attenborough ship is vital. It's a vital part of our arsenal in terms of understanding how the Southern Ocean and the Antarctic continent is changing and understanding the impact that that has on the wider world. So whatever happens in the Antarctic doesn't stay there. It has an influence and impact elsewhere. So Sir David Attenborough, the ship, is bristling with scientific equipment and capabilities, and will allow us to increase the range of measurements that we take of the region, and therefore increase our understanding of the region and how it's changing.
And so when might that process start?
Well, having completed this first set of trials, and some of the science has already started this season with the deployment and recovering of moorings that are already in the Antarctic. But having completed this set of trials, we now have a much greater confidence in the capabilities of the ship. It's like taking delivery of a new high-speed car, high-performance car, in that we're now going to make the adjustments and tune it. You don't take it out onto the racetrack and go flat out right from the get-go. But now that we understand how it handles and how it performs a lot better, the ship will now complete its mission down in the Antarctic this season and then head back up to the UK in the next couple of months. There'll be some work will take place and some further trials. But then next year, next Antarctic season, commencing later on this year, will be the first season of full science trials, and we start to exercise the full capabilities of the vessel.
OK, interesting stuff. I know you'll keep us up to date on all of that. Dr. Andrew Fleming, thanks very much indeed.
No problem.
Do stay with us. Coming up, I'll be joined by Chair of the Chatham House Sustainability Accelerator Advisory Board, Bernice Lee, and the Chairman and Founding Director of the climate change think tank E3G, Tom Berg. And we'll be discussing if Russia's demand to be paid in rubles for gas will have an impact on energy supplies to Europe.
I'm David Blevins, and I'm Sky's senior Ireland correspondent. I'm based in Belfast, a city transformed by peace, but still struggling with its past. Politically, the two sides are as far apart as ever, and it's over that question of who has sovereignty in Northern Ireland, the very issue that's been the source of tension here for generations. It takes 60 minutes to cross the Irish Sea. It took the British monarchy a century. I've spent 25 years reporting the journey from conflict to peace.
The political parties of Northern Ireland have reached agreement.
We help you understand the world with us.
Today, we have reached an agreement with the Conservative Party on support for government in Parliament.
We already know what the government gets out of this deal. What exactly does the DUP get out of it? Well, £1.5 billion. Welcome to Winterfell. It's an iconic location in this globally acclaimed drama. Ophelia was the most powerful hurricane this far east in the Atlantic on record. You can't live in a place like this and not appreciate the environment.
Hello and welcome back to the Daily Climate Show on Sky News. And we're getting straight to discussing the climate issues of the day now with Bernice Lee from Chatham House and Chairman and Founding Director of the climate change think tank E3G, Tom Burke. Good evening to both of you. Nice to see you both. So first of all, a standoff is brewing. Vladimir Putin has said that countries who want Russian gas must pay in rubles. Germany said the announcement by the Russian president amounted to blackmail. A very difficult situation for Western countries who are promising to wean themselves off Russian fossil fuels, but can't quite yet. So, Tom, first of all, what do you think the impact of this threat by Russia will be? Germany has said that it's going to carry on paying for the gas it imports from Russia in euros, as per its contracts, it says. But do you think this threat will make a difference to supply?
Well, it might make a difference to supply. It depends there's a poker game going on. Mr. Putin needs people to buy rubles in order to prop up the value of the ruble in Russia, and we need the gas. And it's now a question of who can look the other in the eye and call the bluff, in a sense. My guess is that this is just adding to the incentives and the pressures for Germany and the rest of Europe to get off Russian gas as fast as it possibly can. So my instinct is there'll be a real temptation for them to call Mr. Putin's bluff. He's going to find it very difficult to go on financing his war if he loses the kind of income that he's getting from the gas. So I wish I knew the answer to that, because if you did, you could win a lot of money betting on it. But I honestly don't know.
Bernice, what's your take on this? I mean, these countries don't want to be paying in rubles. They don't want to be propping up the Russian economy. So what are their options? Some countries are really dependent on Russian gas, aren't they? Can they manage without it?
I mean, look, obviously, as Tom said, this is a brinksmanship game, and obviously no crystal ball. But we also know that what it really does do is to reinforce the idea that it is important that we get off Russian gas as soon as possible. We know that in the UK, for example, heat pumps and insulation would mean that we can get off the imports from Russian gas by, I think, 2027. And so it is indeed possible for some countries to actually get there relatively quickly.
But for others, harder, Tom. I mean, some will inevitably, won't they, think, well, what's the alternative? Maybe the alternative is increasing coal production. In fact, I think that's happened in some countries already. Do you think that's the option they're likely to take?
I think that is, and I think, quite frankly, that's a sensible thing to do in the circumstances, to do that. I think there'll be a lot of manoeuvring going on. Remember, we had in our own past periods when, during the coal miners' strike in the last century, we had to cut down our industry to operating several days a week instead of full time. And I think you'll see there are measures like that will help. But yes, and I think we're going to go on seeing a use of coal. I think we'll see a much greater, that's the value of the EU, I think we'll see a much greater cooperation between countries to try and make sure that industries can go on operating and homes can go on having their lights on and their heating running. But I think there will be a real temptation on the part of Russia on the part of Germany, not to blink, and European countries, and actually to just take emergency measures to see us through what may well be a move in the right direction in any case.
Bernice Lee, do you think that the Russian invasion will end up with more fossil fuels being burnt in Europe?
I think at the moment the worry is that it will definitely lead to a blip right now, as Tom said. At the same time, the direction of travel in the longer term has never been clearer. If we ever needed a reason to get off it as quickly as possible, looking at the multiple layers of blackmail, it is now. So it is actually time to obviously focus back efforts on scaling up renewable, improving efficiency, improving insulation, all the things we know we can do and we can do quicker too.
OK, let's move on to our next topic, which is not unrelated, and that shadow cast by the war in Ukraine stretches over here, of course, and renewable energy bosses here say that their industry can displace gas out of the UK's electricity grid entirely in 5 years. But then that does raise the question, what about transport? What about industry as well? Realistically, we'll need gas and oil for a very long time to come, won't we, Tom? I mean, first of all, this thing that they're talking about renewables replacing the need for gas as far as electricity generation is concerned within 5 years. First of all, is that doable, given that gas generates more than a third of our electricity at present?
I think it is doable to get gas out of electricity. And remember, in any case, the government has committed to us having decarbonised our power system by 2035. So that's just the kind of course we were already on, just accelerating that course to take us down. The thing that we really need to do that would make that even more possible is invest the money the government promised in its manifesto, the £9 billion for energy efficiency improvements, which it hasn't spent. If we were to do that, we'd make it even more possible for us to be confident that the renewable industry could get gas out of electricity in the time they're talking about.
But the picture is much bigger than that, as I was hinting in the introduction there, Bernice, isn't it? If we look at our overall energy consumption, including industry and transport, the vast majority comes from oil and gas, doesn't it? I mean, we're not going to phase that out anytime soon.
I mean, you know, if you look at offshore wind, 11 gigawatt currently, 8.5 in pipeline, 3 to 4 years. 40 gigawatt target by 2030. It will do a lot of the lifting. Electrification can do all the lifting that we are talking about. But this is actually something that we can invest more in and looking forward to as well.
But what about those who say, isn't the obvious thing to do, Bernice, when you're looking at replacing Russian oil and gas, for example, is to just drill closer to home, drill in the North Sea?
So of the 6 oil fields that people are talking about, I think if 3 of them would produce, then probably they could sort of replace the imports already by about 20. I think I mentioned earlier that heat pumps and insulation can basically replace it by 2027. But if they start producing, the 3 out of 6 that could produce is, I think, 2027 or something like that. So in other words, even if they did, it isn't actually, and full capacity would only reach by 2028. So it's not like even if you needed it, they could actually produce any faster. Electrification could provide.
Bernice Lee, Tom Burke, we're out of time. Thank you both very much indeed for your time this evening. Well, that's all from today's show. But coming up, Sky's political editor Beth Rigby speaks to the mayor of Ukraine's capital, Vitaly Klitschko, on her new show, Beth Rigby Interviews. That's coming up. But for me, thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.